The last thing Marcus Reeves did before the world changed was shoot free throws in an empty gym. It was 2:30 in the morning, which was the only time Marcus could be honest with himself. No scouts in the bleachers, no cameras, no sportscast drones hovering at the rafter line, just the hiss of the fluorescence, the squeak of his sneakers on the hardwood, and the ball, that old, cracked Spalding he'd had since he was 12, leaving fingertips with the particular dead weight of a man who had been doing the same thing for 22 years and still wasn't certain he was any good at it. The ball kissed the backboard and fell through. He retrieved it, dribbled twice, shot again. He'd retired 9 months ago, technically. What the sportscast anchors called a graceful step back from the league. What it actually was. A Tuesday afternoon when he'd sat in his car outside the practice facility for 40 minutes, engine running, unable to make himself go inside, and eventually just driven home. He had 3 championship rings. He had a foundation. He had a shoe deal, and a daughter who was learning to read, and a son who still called him Dad, with the kind of unguarded faith that made Marcus feel like he was holding something fragile every time he heard it. He had told himself the retirement was for them. He shot the ball again. It hit the back iron and bounced away, and he let it roll to the baseline without chasing it. That was when the floor opened up, not explosively, not with drama. The hardwood simply split along an invisible seam, and the split became a rectangle, and the rectangle became a hole, and out of the hole came light. A warm amber, somehow dusty light that made Marcus think inexplicably of late afternoons in gymnasiums just like this one, back when he was 10 years old and the game was still just a game. He stood at the free throw line and looked into it. A hand appeared, small, 3 fingers turquoise gray, beckoning. "I know," said a voice from the hole, before Marcus could say anything. "I know how this looks. We don't have a lot of time, and I need you to trust me." Marcus looked at the hand. He looked at the ball, still sitting at the baseline. He went down. The tunnel lasted approximately forever and deposited him in a room that was clearly not on Earth. A fact Marcus registered with a calm that surprised him. The room was large and circular, lit by floating panels that pulsed with a faint bioluminescent blue-green. The floor was a version of a basketball court. The lines were where? The paint was there. But the dimensions were subtly wrong, as if someone had described basketball to an alien species and they'd rendered it from memory. Slightly too long. The 3-point arc a half-foot too shallow on the left side. The hand belonged to a creature about 4 feet tall with enormous ears and fur the color of ash. He wore a jersey. It said Toon Squad in block letters across the chest, and under that, the number 1. He had the kind of eyes that were either very intelligent or very afraid, and at the moment they appeared to be both. "My name is not important," the creature said. "I'm going to need your name," Marcus said. "Bugs," the creature said, and then seemed immediately to regret it. "Look, Mr. Reeves, we've been watching you for a while. We know what you can do. We also know you left. A beat. We need to know if you left because you were done, or if you left because you were afraid." Marcus said nothing. "Because there's a difference," Bugs said. "Retired is when the body gives out, or the game gives back less than it takes. Afraid is something else. And we only have a use for one of those things right now." Marcus looked around the room. He counted 12 others. Creatures of varying heights and shapes, all wearing the same jersey in different numbers. A small duck in a number 3 jersey was arguing with a large pig in a number 7. A creature who appeared to be made mostly of spring-like legs was bouncing in place in the corner, with barely contained energy. At the far end of the court, a woman, no, not a woman, but roughly woman-shaped, a rabbit gray-furred, eyes like cold amber, stood with her arms folded and watched Marcus with a gaze that made him feel like a question she hadn't decided how to answer yet. "What kind of trouble are you in?" Marcus asked. Bugs was quiet for a moment. He glanced at the others, then back at Marcus. "The kind," he said. "That doesn't have a word for it in your language. The kind that ends with us not existing anymore." His name was Swackhammer. Marcus didn't learn this immediately. He learned it the way you learn things in bad situations, which is piece by piece, and never in the order that would have been most useful. What he learned first was the shape of the threat. A species called the Moronians, who operated an entertainment complex somewhere in the Cygnus arm of the galaxy that had been running for 600 years on a very simple business model. They found civilizations, usually small ones, usually ones that had something the crowds wanted, and they took them, destroyed, taken, put on display, made to perform. The Toon Squad had been performing for 8 months, or not performing, which was the problem. Moronians had expected the creatures to be funny, and they had been funny for approximately 3 weeks before the despair set in. Depression makes for poor entertainment. Swackhammer had decided the solution was to give his performers an enemy. Something to fight. Something to lose, too. Something to demonstrate their smallness and inadequacy for a paying audience. He'd built a team, called them the Monstars, given them something that Bugs described only as stolen. Marcus would understand, Bugs said when he saw them. The game was in 11 hours. If the Toon Squad won, they went free. This had been agreed to by Swackhammer in a moment of arrogance, so thorough it hadn't even occurred to him that the agreement might matter. He'd rigged the game, he was certain of that. The Monstars were not beatable, except that they hadn't factored in the things Swackhammer never understood about humans. He doesn't believe any species can truly surprise him, Bugs said. He's seen 10,000 of them. He's very good at identifying a civilization's ceiling. And humans? He thinks your ceiling is the room you're standing in. Marcus looked at the court, at the off-ratio 3-point arc. Show me the Monstars, he said. They showed him on a screen. He watched for 4 minutes without speaking. When it was over, he turned away from the screen and walked to the free throw line, the slightly wrong free throw line, 4 inches off from true, and stood on it for a moment with his eyes closed. The Monstars were 5. They were enormous. Each one stood between 7 and 9 feet tall, with the kind of mass that suggested the word dense wasn't strong enough. They looked like things made from the same material as planets. They moved with a fluid contempt that Marcus recognized immediately, because he'd played against exactly one human who moved that way. A center from New Dusseldorf who had been so confident in his physical dominance that he'd forgotten to actually play basketball. And Marcus had taken him apart by the end of the second quarter by doing something very simple. He'd made the game about something the center didn't understand. The Monstars were fast. The Monstars were strong. The Monstars were in fact exactly what they appeared to be. Physically impossible. What they were not. And this was the thing, this was the seam, was basketball players. They had the stolen abilities of 5 human athletes: speed, vertical, power, reaction time. But abilities are not understanding, and understanding is not love. The Monstars played like creatures who had been handed a weapon and told to swing it. They had never played in a gym at 2:30 in the morning when there was nothing in the world but them and the ball, and the particular honesty of a game with no witnesses. Hearts understood something then that was hard to say and easy to feel. It was the same thing he'd understood at 10 years old in a different gym, before any of it mattered. The game was not about what you could do. It was about what you were willing to do when what you could do wasn't enough. Can they practice? He asked. We have 11 hours, Bugs said. Then let's use 8 of them. The creatures who would become his team were, to put it charitably, a mess. The duck was aggressive and self-involved, and had an extremely poor decision-making rate on the fast break. Pig couldn't guard anything taller than himself, which in this company meant he was functionally useless on defense against the Monstars. The springy one, Marcus learned his name was Sprocket, had the best vertical leap of anyone Marcus had ever seen in any species, but no conception of when to use it. Launching into full aerial commitment at moments of zero tactical value, and arriving back on the court too late to be useful. The amber-eyed rabbit whose name, Bugs told him quietly, was Lyra, was a different story. She had been a defender on the Toon Squad for all 8 months of their captivity. She had guarded every opponent they'd ever faced. She was fast in the way that water is fast, not speed exactly, but trajectory. The way she angled into position half a second before the ball arrived somewhere. The way she read the court not as a static plane, but as a field of probabilities. Marcus watched her for 10 minutes during warm-up, and then called her over. You've been carrying them, he said. She looked at him levelly. Yes, that stops today. I need you on offense. They'll collapse on me. I'm the best player they have, and Swackhammer knows it. If I drive, they put 2 on me and everyone else is open. but everyone else won't be open the way they've been open before, Marcus said. That's what the next 8 hours are for. She held his gaze for a moment. The amber eyes were unreadable. Then she nodded once and jogged back to the court. Marcus spent the first 2 hours on a single play. It was a play his high school coach had drawn up on a whiteboard 24 years ago. A simple misdirection that relied on one player making the defense think the ball was going somewhere it wasn't. His coach had called it the lie. It worked because human defenders respond to movement before they respond to logic, and by the time the logic catches up, the lie has already done its job. He spent 2 hours teaching the duck to sell the lie. This was the longest 2 hours of Marcus Reeves's life. Telegraphing, Marcus said, for the 15th time. I am absolutely not telegraphing, the duck said. Shh. You look at the target before the fake. That's called having eyes. That's called giving away the play. Marcus took the ball. He walked the duck through it again. Step, shoulder drop, eyes left. Then, and this was the part the duck couldn't seem to learn, a full half-second of committed, convincing attention to the wrong direction before the pass. Why does it have to be half a second? The duck demanded. Because a quarter second read as a twitch and a full second reads as deliberate. You want the defender in between. You want them to start believing before they can stop themselves. The duck stared at him. That's manipulation. That's basketball. Something shifted in the duck's expression. I can do manipulation, he said, with a different energy than before. By the third repetition after that, he was doing it perfectly. Around the 6th hour, Bugs appeared at Marcus's shoulder with 2 cups of something that smelled like coffee, but tasted like coffee filtered through starlight, which Marcus decided not to analyze too carefully. I need to tell you something about the monsters, Bugs said. Tell me. The abilities they're using. They were stolen from athletes who volunteered for something and didn't understand what they were volunteering for. 5 players from your world. The Moronians took the abilities. They have a word for what they did. I don't have a translation, but the closest thing in your language is drafted. And the players are still back on Earth, but they're diminished. Less than they were. Marcus turned this over. We win. The contract specifies the abilities return to origin upon game's end. Win or lose, the abilities go back. Bugs looked at him. But if we lose, we stay. If we win, we go home. And he paused. You go home too. I need to ask you something first. Ask. You haven't asked why we picked you specifically. Of all the humans available. Marcus said nothing. You retired, Bugs said. 9 months ago, officially. But you've been in a gym every night since then, at 2:30 in the morning. We've been watching. He looked at the court, where Lyra was running the duck and the pig and Sprocket through the lie play, with a precision that had not been there 6 hours ago. You didn't retire because you were done. You retired because you were afraid of wanting it too much. Marcus was quiet for a long time. My daughter's 8, he said finally. She told me last spring she wanted to be a basketball player. I told her she could be anything she wanted. She asked me if I loved basketball, and I said yes. She asked me if loving something could make it hurt. I said yes. She thought about this for a while, and then she said, "Is it worth it?" Marcus looked at his hands. I didn't have an answer. I realized I'd been playing for 3 years without knowing if it was worth it anymore, and I thought the honest thing to do was stop until I knew. And now? Marcus picked up the old Spalding, the cracked one, that he'd brought down from the gym without thinking. He turned it in his hands. I think worth it and not worth it might be the wrong question, he said. I think the right question is, what are you made of? And does this thing, this particular thing, let you find out? He looked at the team on the court. Let's finish practice, he said. The arena held 150,000 Moronians, which Marcus understood in the abstract, and could not quite hold in his mind as a real number, until he walked out of the tunnel, and the noise hit him like a physical object. It was not like any crowd noise he had ever heard at a human game. It had a texture to it, a sibilance, like static overlaid on static, and beneath it a rhythmic sub-bass pulse that he felt more in his chest than his ears. The Moronians were shaped like nothing he had a good reference for. Roughly the size of large children, with a bioluminescence to their skin that cycled colors in what he slowly understood was their equivalent of facial expression. The arena smelled like ozone and something floral and deeply wrong. Swackhammer was at half-court when Marcus emerged. He was taller than the other Moronians and moved differently. Deliberate, unhurried, with the particular confidence of someone who had never once been wrong about the outcome of anything. He wore a suit that Marcus recognized, distantly, as an insult. It was cut in a style clearly modeled on human formal wear, specifically designed to signal that it was wearing a costume of human culture the way one wears a costume. He looked at Marcus for a long moment with enormous amber gold eyes. Then he smiled, which on a Moronian face was not a warm expression. "You brought a human," he said to Bugs, loudly enough to carry. "How charming." Desperate. Marcus met his eyes and said nothing. "I've studied your species," Swackhammer said. 600 years of cataloging civilizations, mister." He glanced at a screen on his wrist. "Reeves, I know your upper limits. I know your architecture. I know your history of conflict, and your history of collapse, and your remarkable talent for building things, and then tearing them down." He spread his hands. "You're a fascinating species, tragic in the interesting way. But basketball?" He turned away. "You invented basketball, and my team is going to prove to these 150,000 that the things you invent eventually outgrow you." Marcus watched him walk to the Moronian bench. Then he turned to his team, gathered in a loose cluster behind him. The Monstars were already on the court. They were larger than they'd looked on the screen. Marcus watched them warm up and saw, clearly, the seam he'd identified earlier. They were swinging the weapon. Every movement was maximum force, zero economy. They had the abilities of the 5 stolen athletes, and absolutely none of the intelligence that had made those athletes worth stealing from. Marcus turned to his team. "I'm not going to give you a speech," he said. "You know what to do. You've been doing it for 8 months without me. I just reorganized some things." He looked at Lyra. "You know your assignment." He looked at the duck. "You know yours." He looked at Sprocket, who was already bouncing in place. "Save the vertical for the last 6 minutes. You'll know when." He looked at the pig, who was the weakest link and knew it, and who was looking at Marcus with the expression of a creature waiting to be told what he couldn't do. "You," Marcus said, "are going to do the one thing they can't prepare for. You're going to be a completely unpredictable variable. Don't play the position, play the chaos." The pig blinked. "Can you do that?" The pig straightened. "I'm a professional at chaos," he said, with a dignity that Marcus found unexpectedly moving. "Good," Marcus said. They lost the first quarter. They lost it the way Marcus had expected, badly, but informatively. The Monstars came out with the full weight of their stolen talent and applied it like a hammer to every possession. They couldn't be screened. They couldn't be boxed out. Lyra stripped one of them twice in a row with a read that was simply astonishing to watch. And both times the Monstar simply reached out with a hand the size of a dinner plate and took the ball back, which was, strictly speaking, a foul, except that the Moronian officials found this very funny. Marcus called timeout with 2 minutes left in the first and gathered the team. "Good," he said. "Down 22 points, the duck said. "I know. I watched. We learned 22 points worth of information. They're a one-layer system. They know one response, force. Watch what happens when we stop running the lie in a straight line and start running it in a curve." Lyra was looking at him. "They'll collapse on the pivot." "Yes." "Which is when Sprocket comes off the strong side screen at 45 degrees. Not straight to the basket, 85 degrees. The angle is wrong for a clean look. The angle is wrong for a clean look from a human," Marcus said. "Whatever Sprocket is, I have no idea." "Sprocket. What happens if you release from 45 degrees on a falling away lean?" Sprocket looked at his own hands thoughtfully. "I've never tried that." "Try it in the second quarter, just once. Let's see what we learn." They went back out. They lost the first quarter by 19. The second quarter was different. Not better, not immediately, but different in the way that matters, which is that the Toon Squads stopped being victims of the game and started being participants in it. The lie play worked 3 times before the Monstars adjusted. And in those 3 times, Lyra scored twice, and the Duck scored once. And Marcus saw something change in the arena. The 150,000 Moronians, who had been color cycling in expressions of smug satisfaction, shifted to something else. Not worry, not yet, but attention. Sprocket hit the 45-degree falling away shot in the 3rd minute of the second quarter and it went in. And the arena went almost silent for 2 full seconds. Marcus was on the bench. He was not listed on the Toon Squad roster and hadn't planned to play. And he heard, in that 2-second silence, something that he recognized from 22 years of basketball. He had heard it in arenas across 7 countries, in different languages with different crowd sounds and different court textures. And it was always the same. The sound of a crowd recalibrating. The sound of an audience that had been certain of something becoming uncertain. Swackhammer, in the Moronian owner's box above the court, was very still. They still lost the first half, by 11. The score was the wrong thing to track. The right thing to track was the color cycle of the crowd, which by halftime had shifted from the warm amber of satisfied entertainment into the rapid blue-green of something the Moronians apparently found alarming. Asked Bugs what the color meant. Roughly translated, Bugs said. Something like, this was not supposed to be this interesting. Halftime was 12 minutes. Marcus spent 11 of them saying almost nothing. He sat on the bench in the Toon Squad locker room, which was a repurposed storage area that smelled of whatever the Moronian equivalent of chalk dust was. And he looked at his hands. The duck sat next to him after a while and said quietly, not in his normal voice, "Are we going to win?" Marcus thought about his daughter. About the question she'd asked. Is it worth it? He thought about what he'd told Bugs. About worth it being the wrong question. I don't know, he said. I know we're going to find out exactly what we're made of. And I know that matters regardless. The duck was quiet for a moment. I've been performing for 8 months, he said, making people laugh who aren't laughing with us. It changes something. I didn't notice it happening. Did. I know, Marcus said. Does that go away? When you get home, Marcus said, go do something you love because you love it, with nobody watching. Chance you get. He paused. It goes away. The duck nodded. Then, after a moment, you've been doing that at 2:30 in the morning. Yeah, Marcus said. Did it work? Marcus looked at the cracked Spalding in his hands. He thought about the free throw he'd missed, right before the floor opened up. He thought about the ones he'd made before that. He thought about 22 years, and 3 rings, and a daughter learning to read, and a gym in the dark, and all the ways a human being finds out what they're made of, when there's no audience and no record, and nothing at stake except the private truth of who they are. Ask me at the end of the 4th quarter, he said. They lost the 3rd quarter and gained 7 points back. Net deficit, 4 points. Sprocket fouled out in the 3rd quarter, trying a defensive move that was either brilliant or insane. And Marcus strongly suspected both. Pig, playing chaos as instructed, had drawn 6 offensive fouls from the Monstars by the simple expedient of appearing in places they didn't expect him, which the Moronian officials apparently could not disallow, despite their visible confusion. Lyra had scored 18 points in the 2nd half on 11 shots, which was a shooting percentage that Marcus, who had played at the highest level of human basketball for a decade and a half, had never seen sustained across that many attempts. She was extraordinary. She had been extraordinary the whole time. She had been carrying this team through 8 months of forced performance and captivity and despair. And she was still playing with a precision and will that made Marcus's chest hurt. With 4 minutes left in the 4th quarter, down by 4, Sprocket fouled out, and Marcus looked at his bench. He had the duck, he had the pig, he had Lyra. He had 3 players who were exhausted, and one who was vibrating with something that might have been anxiety or might have been eagerness. And Marcus had learned enough about the duck in the past 12 hours to know it was eagerness. However much it looked like the other thing, he also had himself. He hadn't planned to play. He was not technically on the roster. He was not, in the terms of the agreement Swackhammer had made, a member of the Toon Squad. He had come as a coach. Marcus stood up. The owner's box, Swackhammer's voice came down like a stone. You're not on the roster. Marcus looked up at him. Check the contract, he said. The agreement specifies 5 players from the Toon Squad at game time. I was in the Toon Squad's locker room at game time. I'm in the Toon Squad's dugout. I'm wearing a jersey. This last part was not entirely accurate. He had grabbed a jersey from a hook in the locker room and thrown it on over his shirt. It said Toon Squad on the front and had no number. He did not think this was relevant. Swackhammer stared at him for a long moment. The bioluminescent color cycle of his skin went through several rapid transitions that Marcus couldn't read. Then, slowly, it settled on something that might have been amusement, the expensive, contemptuous kind. "Fine," he said. "Let's see what a retired human can do." The crowd was cycling that blue-green again. The interesting and alarming color, all 150,000 of them. Marcus walked onto the court. He had not played a competitive game in 9 months. He had been in a gym at 2:30 in the morning, shooting free throws, with a cracked Spalding and running plays by himself in the dark. With no witnesses, for no reason except that the game had been telling him something he wasn't ready to stop hearing. His body remembered things his mind had to think about. The first time he touched the ball in the fourth quarter, a monster closed on him, the one they'd internally designated as 4, the largest of the 5, who had apparently decided that Marcus was the easiest target by virtue of being the slowest person on the court. Yes. Marcus felt the familiar shadow of enormous presence, the way air pressure changes when something very large moves near you quickly. Pump faked. A pump fake is one of the oldest moves in basketball. It is in its essence a lie told with your body. It says, "I am going up." And when the defender commits to that belief, you take the space their commitment has vacated. 4 went up like a building falling sideways. Marcus took 2 dribbles left and released. The ball arsed up in the wrong light of the alien arena, crossed the unlikely distance of the court, and fell through. He had 4 minutes and the team had 4 points to find. He found 3 of them himself in the first 2 minutes. Not because he was the best player on the court. Lyra was. She had been all game. But because 4 had decided he was a target. And Marcus used that belief the way he'd been using it his whole career. Let the opponent decide what you are. Then be something else. With 90 seconds left, they were down 1. 45 seconds left, Lyra went up for a driving layup and a monster hand, 2, the quickest of them, caught her mid-air. She came down wrong. Not catastrophically, but wrong. Marcus watched her get up carefully, testing the ankle, and saw in her face the calculation he recognized from every player he'd ever seen make that calculation. How much does it cost and how much time is left? She stayed on the court. "Ball," she said to Marcus. He gave it to her. She drove on 2 with a full commitment that made Marcus's stomach drop, because the ankle was not right, and 2 was the fastest monster on the court, and she was going directly at both problems at once. She wasn't going for the shot, she was going for the foul. Drawing 2 into a commitment, pulling the double team that came with it, and in the seam that opened. A half-second of 2 monsters converging on Lyra, and forgetting about the duck. She whipped a behind-the-back pass to the duck on the left wing. The duck caught it. He looked at the basket. He looked at his defender, who had arrived a hair late and was lunging. He did the lie. He did it perfectly. A full half-second of committed, convincing attention to the left, which pulled the defender 6 inches in the wrong direction, which was all the space the duck needed. Shot. It went in. Tie game. 22 seconds Marcus called the last timeout. He looked at his team. The duck breathing hard, the pig who had played chaos so thoroughly he seemed to have become at Lyra, standing on one leg, with the careful dignity of someone who will not show you where it hurts. "Do you need?" Marcus asked her. 30 seconds. I'll give you 15. "Do you need from the court?" She looked at the paint. Left side, high post. If you set the screen at the arc and roll hard to the basket, you pull their center. I can get to the elbow. From the elbow you need to create your own shot. I know. On that ankle, she met his eyes with those amber ones. "I know," she said again. He set the screen at the arc. He rolled. The monster center moved. The angle opened exactly as she'd said. Lyra came to the elbow and received the pass from the pig, who had materialized in the right place through what Marcus chose to believe was professional chaos, and she squared, and she shot, and the sound of the arena, all 150,000 voices, went away. There was only the ball in the air. There was only the particular silence that exists between the release and the result. The silence that Marcus Reeves had been living in his whole adult life. The one he'd built his career inside, and his retirement around avoiding, because living in it required wanting the outcome enough, badly to be afraid of it. He wanted it. He was afraid it went in. Swackhammer's reaction was interesting. He did not rage. He did not argue. He went very still, in In the owner's box, as the Toon Squad stood on the court in the roar of 150,000 Maronians, cycling every color Marcus hadn't seen yet. Something brilliant and rapid, like lightning storms in miniature. And Marcus stood at the free throw line and watched Swackhammer be still. The Monstars began to shrink. Marcus hadn't known this would happen. It happened, apparently, automatically when the game ended. The stolen abilities pulling back to wherever they'd originated. 5 human athletes somewhere on Earth who would wake up tomorrow and feel, inexplicably, more like themselves. The Monstars shrank to something considerably smaller and considerably less certain. And they looked at each other. And then they looked at Swackhammer, and one of them said something in their language that Marcus understood without translation. The look on their faces was the look of people who had been told their whole lives that the ceiling was fixed, discovering that it wasn't. Swackhammer stared at Marcus for a long moment from the owner's box. "How?" he said finally, in a voice that had lost all its expensive contempt. Marcus looked the axe Spalding in his hands. He thought about everything he could say. About the particulars of the game, the lie play, and the 45-degree angle, and Lyra's ankle, and the Ducks' half-second. About the 8 months of a team, playing through despair and keeping its skill alive, because the skill was theirs. And not even captivity could take that. About what it means to love something, not because it is safe, but because it is yours. He thought about his daughter's question. "Is it worth it?" he said, mostly to himself. He looked up at Swackhammer. "Yeah," he said. "Turns out it is." The tunnel home smelled like gymnasium chalk and late nights. Marcus went up through it alone, Bugs having explained that the team would follow once the terms were processed. He came up through the gym floor the same way he'd gone down. The rectangle of warm amber light, the climb, the solidity of hardwood underfoot. It was still night. The fluorescent still hissed. The ball he'd been shooting before all of this was still somewhere near the baseline. He walked to it and picked it up. Stood at the free throw line. He shot, it went in. He stood there for a while, in the empty gym, in the dark, in the honest quiet of a place where no one was watching, and nothing was at stake except the private truth of who you were. He thought about Lyra and the ankle she hadn't complained about. He thought about the duck and the lie that had taken 2 hours to learn, and would never be forgotten. He thought about the pig, professional of chaos, turning up exactly where no one expected him. He thought about Sprocket launching at 45 degrees into alien arena light, releasing the ball with the total faith of a creature who had never been told that angle couldn't work. He thought about what they'd all been made of, and how finding out had been terrible and frightening and entirely worth it. He shot again. The ball kissed the rim, fell through, he retrieved it. He was there until morning, in the dark, alone, and the game was still the game, and it was still enough. Outside, eventually, the first light came in through the high gymnasium windows. That particular morning gray that turns gold as it falls. The kind of light that doesn't ask anything of you except that you be awake to see it. Marcus stood at the line and held the ball and looked at the light for a long moment. Then he shot the ball one more time and didn't wait to see if it went in. He had a daughter to get home to. He had a question to answer. The door of the gym swung shut behind him, and the ball arsed through the quiet air of the empty court, and it went in. Because, of course, it did. Not because he was lucky. Not because he was special, but because 22 years of 2:30 mornings had made his hands know something his mind was still learning. Which is that love doesn't stop being love, just because nobody's watching. Court was empty, and the lights were still on, and somewhere in the Cygnus arm of the galaxy, in an arena that held 150,000 beings who had come to watch something be defeated, 11 creatures in Toon Squad jerseys were going home, and Marcus Reeves, who had retired 9 months ago and had never once stopped playing, stepped out into the morning and decided that afraid and worth it could coexist in the same heart without canceling each other out. That, he thought, was something you couldn't steal. That was the whole thing.